All right, well, good evening and welcome to Leadership Styles featuring the SLPI, which is the Student Leadership Practices Inventory. My name is Mike Paestella and I'm the Assistant Director of Campus Life at SUNY Oswego. And I will be presenting today some history of leadership and how we got to where we are today with leadership, and taking a look at the 5 practices of leadership from the SLPI. My email will be at the end of the presentation. So if you wanted to email me to learn more about this or investigate one day, maybe filling out the SLPI, that's something I'd be happy to talk with you about if you wanted to email me. So the first question is, what is leadership? And thinking about, what does this word mean to you? Because leadership may mean different things to different folks. And as we look at that and think about that, we have to think about, if we're coming at leadership from different perspectives, that might explain some of the challenges we have when we look at leadership and leaders and followers and how they work together. If I were to bring up baseball and football, while you may or may not know the intimate rules of the sports, none of you would say, oh, well, baseball is a sport with goalposts and it's where you have a quarterback, because you would know that that's probably not baseball. And for football, you would know that there's not a bat and a diamond that has bases on it that way. But for leadership, someone might be bringing football and someone might be bringing baseball. So now we're going to try and bring a lot of that together. So leadership has meant a lot to a lot of people. And as we look at this evolution, we'll examine it to see where it moves forward and looks at the 5 practices that way. And I encourage you to think about how that can play into your roles as student leaders in your involvement on campus. Through the years, leadership has really evolved in our society and how it's looked at, how it's defined, and what that means. Once upon a time, there was a great man approach, which, as we can see in the title, is pretty sexist, and an approach that it's probably good we've moved beyond, where the eldest son of the king was going to be the next leader. Then there was a trait approach and behavior approach and situational and charismatic approaches. All of those have, after great man, have different qualities of them that have positive things to them that could be helpful to individuals, be as leaders or followers, but none of them really prove to be a one set, this is what leadership is, as we move forward with how we define leadership. So I wanted to put those styles out there because a lot of what you might have heard about, thought about, read about may tie to one of those approaches to leadership. So it's important to note them as we move forward. But where I'd like to focus are on these things called reciprocal theories before we get into the SLPI. They focus on the reciprocal nature of the leader-follower interactions. So therefore, everyone's playing a role in this. And that's where you're going to emphasize the collective goals rather than the leader's goals. So it's, what's the purpose of our organization? Why are we doing this as a group? It's not about a person, but about those collective goals or purposes that you're working on. So this really elevates the role of followers. And some people don't like that word, so you might use the word participants, collaborators, depending on your definition that way. I think followers is still a good word, even though maybe it's changed how people look at it as, oh, followers don't think. Well, that's not the case in reciprocal theories. They're pretty important to the process because without them, there wouldn't be a process if there were just the leaders that way. There are 5 major styles or areas of reciprocal leadership. And we're going to briefly look at those because those are areas that I think as student leaders and as individuals in society who want to become civically engaged, and that could be helping out of the YMCA, could be volunteering for a local theater company, or it could be running for office. Maybe it's running for school board, maybe it's running for town board, or something more complex than that in the future. So these reciprocal leadership models could be very helpful with that. Those are servant leadership, transforming leadership, complexity theory leadership, adaptive leadership, and shared leadership. Servant leadership really kind of, what I like to think about this is a great diagram I saw in a textbook I use in class that's literally flips a pyramid. The leader's role is to serve the followers. So think about that. So think about a traditional pyramid where maybe you have general members, and then you have committee chairs, and then you have officers in the exec board, and then you have a president. So it's this pyramid that's getting smaller as it gets to the top. Imagine if you flip that, and imagine if one of the focuses of the president was how are they serving the members? How are they helping the committee chairs become successful? And what does that mean? And that's something we're going to investigate with the SLPI in a little bit. So the leader is motivated by the desire to make a positive difference for others. So you go to the position or others place you in the position because of what you have to offer that way and how you can help others. So it's not so much about you, but the process. Transforming leadership, very popular one. Author McGregor Burns, who did a lot to develop this and really started to change the way we look at leadership in the 1970s into the 80s. And that was a focus on higher ideals, moral values such as liberty, justice, equality, peace, and humanitarianism, and what that means. So it's taking a step beyond the transaction of I give you this, you give me this, but it goes to another level of what that can mean as far as transforming people and what they get out of things. I think this form of leadership is very useful today. And I think it's something we're seeing in very meaningful ways throughout our country right now as we take up social justice issues as a community, as a society, and try and make fundamental change to institutions that for a few hundred years have been a certain way, and now it's time to modernize and move forward. So transforming leadership can be that thing that raises the ideal, truly sets an area where we have equality and inclusion and move things forward. Complexity theory on leadership, well, it's kind of complex, even if you do the reading on this one. So I think that's interesting that they picked the name because they probably didn't know what else to think about. But when we have dynamic changes and there's influences coming in and out of the process everywhere and things are shifting constantly, it can change that traditional look at things. A standard rigid hierarchy may not work very well in complexity situations. So therefore, how are you moving things? How are people at all levels of the organization able to make changes? There used to be some studies on Southwest Airlines in regards to how even someone at the gate of the airport had certain levels of autonomy where they could make game time decisions that you wouldn't find in any other airline that way, so that they could help customers, they could help kids that were flying alone, they could do different things to assist the elderly that would require 1 or 2 levels of hierarchy at other places. And that's part of why they were really popular for a while and considered one of the best airlines in the country. So something to think about is in complexity, when you know you can't control things, where does this play out and how do you empower others? This leads us to adaptive leadership. And with adaptive leadership, again, we're not looking at just what the leader's wishes are. And we're looking at group members and how this plays out and how they adapt, building on the Southwest situation in many ways, so that you know you've empowered people to move forward and work on things. One of the things I used to share with the student involvement team was that when we were working with SA and our group to set up the student involvement fairs that would happen in the arena, that while I spent a chunk of the summer organizing and moving the process forward, between Maddie, who's our administrative assistant and kind of like field general of the points, and our graduate assistants and other staff that were helping as we help each other with each other's programs. So Maggie helping out or Kashonda helping out as we would help them out with Greek life or Alana, that if I didn't show up that day, they would be able to adapt and do it because we were all on the same page. We knew what we were doing and the group had an intelligence about it. We knew our goal and how it was going to play out. And we had so much communication that it would work. Adaptive leadership clearly then plays into shared leadership. And shared leadership is a model, if applied in most student organizations, which can really transform all of what you do and raise things to another level. So leadership is owned by the whole system. So as you get involved, after you've been there 3-4 meetings, you have voting rights, you see yourself as an integral part of the leadership system. You don't need a title to be a part of this and be really engaged in it. Leadership is distributed among interdependent group members. So a committee is empowered to do something. If you have a committee that runs a program every year and you know you've appointed or elected the right people to it, they know they can do that. They're not checking in with the vice president or the president all the time. They know from the treasurer what their budget is, and they're working on that. Leadership embedded in social interactions. It occurs through relationships and with followers influencing the leadership. So it's not just top down. Kind of goes back to servant to a degree, where those officers and committee chairs are also influenced by the new members, which might even mean a first-year student who just joined the Oswego community could be influencing the senior because they might be working on a program and that person might be able to say, well, in my hometown or in the high school, we did this, and add something that impacts things in a way that wouldn't have happened in the old rigid hierarchy of management where it's top down and a new person wouldn't be allowed to share influence that way. Which leads to the leadership requires mutual learning, that heightened understanding by learning from each other's perspectives and experiences. In my leadership class, and the one I instruct in the fall, it's all first-year students. And part of when we go over expectations, I share with them that I hope before the end of the semester, I've learned something from them because it's a learning community that we have in class. It's not just for me to dump knowledge on them. It's for us to grow as a group as we do the readings, as we do personality inventories and move forward. So think about if your student organization, think about if your residence hall floor, think about if your place of work that way. And they look at that mutual learning and support and how that plays out. That could have a really huge impact on things. So I thank you for indulging me in that real quick tour of the history of leadership. With Bill and Ted's trilogy complete now, I guess. Their third movie coming out. I wish I had a phone booth. You might have to Google what those are so that we could have went back and maybe looked at leadership from great man to servant to shared that way and seeing it in action in different ways. But that's something, again, in a leadership course in the future, you might be able to look into more, or reading it and other research to see how we got to where we are today, because that's a big change from someone's oldest son being the leader to this idea of shared leadership. And even the newest person can influence the person with the biggest title, so to speak, in the group. Which leads us to the main event, the Student Leadership Practices Inventory, which you often will hear me refer to in the point as the SLPI. And the SLPI, it goes over 5 practices of leadership. And this is done, if you ever take the SLPI, you will go through 30 behaviors and you'll go through these 6 questions for each of the 5 practices. And it will give you a reflection on how much you use each of those practices. And then it'll go over some ideas about how you can work on those to incorporate them more into your leadership process. And that doesn't matter if you're a brand new member or if you're the president of the club or the general manager of the TV or radio station. It can help you all the way through. Now, those 5 practices are model the way, inspire a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, and encourage the heart. And with that, they also have what are called 10 commitments. And we're going to look at the 2 commitments that go with each of the 5 practices now a little bit more in depth. So that first practice, model the way. And the 2 commitments that go with that are clarify values by finding your voice and affirming shared values, and set the example by aligning actions with shared values. So now think about that from a student organization perspective, clarifying your values. As new students went to the involvement fair and went into your Zoom room or your Google Meet or went to your Laker Life page, as it was all online or virtual this year, what did they learn about your values that way? And then how did they see that these were shared? If they went into women's rugby, so to speak, did they find officers who were willing to talk to them about this new dynamic game that they may have only seen on TV or maybe only heard of and no one knew anything about it? And how could that impact things as far as if someone were going to try that out for the very first time? Because there aren't a lot of women who are playing rugby at the high school level. So it could be a really new experience for them that way. If they went to the geology club, were they greeted by officers of the club that were saying, here are some of the things we do that are a lot of fun outside of the classroom that are tied to geology, but really are tied to going outdoors, learning, having a great time in our environment. Maybe that's at Rice Creek, maybe that's traveling to Alex Bay to look at outcrops, maybe it's different things that way. Maybe it's sharing about a brown bag lunch series that they do with professors in Shinneman Hall. But hopefully there's been this modeling of this is what we do. So what I would ask you to think about now, if you're watching this video, is think about who's influenced you, who's modeled the way for you. And that could be something from your involvement in a sport, a theater production, in a musical event, maybe a place of worship, maybe a community group you were part of, maybe the local Y or Big Brothers, Big Sisters. Who's modeled that way for you? How did they influence you? And how did that lead to you watching this video and thinking about leadership that way? Another thing to think about with this, and again, feel free to pause the video again as you do this, is if you are an officer of an organization, or you're aspiring to be an officer of an organization or an RI, or involved in a community group, how are you going to model the way? What are some steps you're going to take to make sure that your behaviors model that purpose of the club or organization? That your behaviors reflect the mission of residence life or of the academic area that you want to work in as a TA one day or as a tutor. And how does that play out? Because that modeling the way is the first practice that we look at through the SLPI. Now, the second practice, inspire a shared vision. Envision the future by imagining exciting and ennobling possibilities. Enlist others in a common vision by appealing to their shared aspirations. Now, you may have already started to see a pattern here with these 5 practices of leadership. If you are modeling the way in such a way to really show your mission and purpose, then it's going to be an easy step to get people to see that shared vision, which goes back to shared leadership and thinking about why are we all in this together? So for example, you might have enjoyed writing in high school. You might have found that you enjoyed writing in college, never had been involved with it prior to this time. But then as you're doing that, you realize, I like to share what I write. So maybe you submit some articles to the Great Lake Review and you get published in one of their publications at the end of the semester. And that leads you to then thinking, well, I'd like to help organize this. I'd like to work on the executive board of Great Lake Review. And then you get involved that way. And as you get involved and become that officer, then you start sharing with other young writers or maybe older writers who just never thought about sharing their work. And you inspire them to this shared vision of how can we share our artistic expression? How can we share our thoughts and our writing and our passions and do it in this way as a group and celebrate what each other has to bring to the table that way? And that's how you can get people into this shared vision. So why do they want to get involved? Why do they want to go to your program? Why do they want to see what you're doing that way? So some things to think about is how do you communicate that? If you're having your weekly meeting and you notice there's 4 or 5 people in the Zoom you haven't seen before, what are you doing to communicate your vision? To share this is why our group exists. This is how we move forward. Because that's a key thing to do, and to know how to do that to keep them involved so that one day they're moving into the roles that you currently have. So think about, how do people joining your organization this fall for the first time know really what your vision is? And how do they know their role in it? And by your role modeling the way and inspiring them with your shared vision of where you're going, be it for the big program that's coming up, maybe for a collaborative event with another organization, maybe for a guest speaker you're hosting or a program week. Make sure that they see that vision and know where you are. This leads us to challenge the process. And challenging the process can really be a fun one in regards to this. So one of the things that I think you need to think about in challenging the process that you may not have been thinking about is, what do you do with this? And this is a paperclip. So thinking about this paperclip as I read the 2 commitments to challenging the process, because it could really affect your thoughts on things. So in challenging the process, search for opportunities by seizing the initiative and looking outward for innovative ways to improve. Experiment and take risks by constantly generating small wins and learning from that experience. So seizing initiative, looking outward for innovative ways to improve. So this is one I encourage you actually to take back to your student organization. In your Zoom rooms, have everyone grab a paperclip. Say at the next meeting, bring a paperclip. Hold it up like I am. Take out your phone and give them 30 seconds to a minute, however much time you'd like, but I would recommend one of those time periods to write down or type out all the things they could do with a paperclip. Now, I'm not going to stop that now for the video, but if you were doing that and you wanted to do it yourself, you could pause the video now, use your phone, time yourself for 30 seconds or a minute, see all the things you can write down with do with a paperclip. Now, if you took some time to do that, and you do it with your student organization, have them go around and share. Maybe even start out by saying, raise your hand, who had 5, who had 6, see who had the most. Maybe you find out in that first 30 seconds or minute that there's 7 or 8, that's a top person. You have everybody share some, maybe share all of them, whatever they want to get to. Say, wow, that was fantastic. Now we're going to take another minute. Add to your list anything you've thought of, heard about now. Because while some people will write down exactly what they heard from another person, increasing their list because of brainstorming and seeing these new innovative ways, others, by hearing those other innovative ways, will have thought of something else that's new, that wasn't even brought up. Don't be surprised if 7 or 8 was your total after the first minute, that maybe upwards of 20 is your total after the second minute. So that's challenging the process, because it'd be easy to say, well, Mike used that paperclip to put his notes together for this PowerPoint that he's looking at as he asks us some of these questions. And that might be true. But in your brainstorming, in your activity, you probably came up with a good 12 to 24 other things that you can use this paperclip for, maybe even had some good laughs in the process of discussing that. Then think about, how does that approach what we're doing, particularly this semester, where things are happening in Zoom, things are happening in Google Meets, things are happening in formats that we're not used to. But that doesn't mean it can't be awesome. That doesn't mean that we can't have great wins, but we need to experiment. We need to think about, will this program work in this format? And maybe it won't, but if no one's going to get hurt and it's not going to waste a lot of money, it's worth a try. Check it out, see how it plays out, because maybe you'll come up with this new program that you're going to want to keep doing, even in an online format, even after we can go back to room 133 in the MCC and do this program. So think about that. How can you challenge the process? Obviously staying within the rules of the student handbook in the college, but how do you challenge the process for your organization to change things? I have a pin in my office in the point. I encourage you to come take a picture of it at some point if you meet with me. And it says, but we've always done it this way. And it has the universal not sign over that. So think about, if you have that program that's 20 years old in your organization and it just doesn't work anymore, and it doesn't get people excited anymore, that doesn't mean it wasn't an amazing program 20 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. But if it's not working now, shake it up. Think about, what could you do now? Because you want to have people who are inspired. They're sharing in that vision and moving forward. And sometimes that means changing some of those programs. Sometimes that means adding something. Sometimes that means stopping something that's been done for a while and seeing where it moves forward. So challenge the process. From challenging the process, we move to enable others to act. And the two commitments for enable others to act are foster collaboration by building trust and facilitating relationships, strengthen others by increasing self-determination and developing competence. So this is another way to really talk about empowerment. So how do you empower others? And depending where you are with things, how have you been empowered? So strengthen others by increasing self-determination and developing competence. Often at times in student organizations, and sometimes some community groups too, we see leaders who are really burned out because they're doing everything. Well, I have to make sure it's right. I have to do everything myself. Well, that burns that person out. The other thing it does is it doesn't help anyone else develop competence. And particularly in student organizations where there's constant turnover, because someone's not going to be an executive officer for 4 or 5 years. They're going to come to us, we go. They're going to get involved. They may or may not become an officer. Then they might be an officer for a year or two. Then they're going to graduate. So it's not like you're going to have a 20-year officer in a position, say like state, federal government, or a CEO. So you have to think about, how do you sustain yourself? How do you constantly develop new committee chairs, new officers, more people to get involved? And that's empowering them. That's saying, you know what, each October we do this program. And those of us that are seniors are going to guide you and teach you the history. But sophomores and juniors, you're going to run it, because next year we're not going to be here. And first year students, you're going to help them out and see where that goes that way. This will go a long way to building trust within your organization. Because if you trust me to work on this project, you trust me to get involved, that's going to show me that you're invested in me. And that's going to mean that I'm going to be more invested in the group moving forward. Now, that doesn't mean to a first-year student in October you say, hey, run this big committee, because you'll probably scare that person away. But it could be saying, you know what, sophomore, you saw it last year, we have faith in you, step up. We can have you run this committee. We can have a couple first years help you. And we as juniors and seniors are here to guide you and how that moves forward that way. So it's really something to think about. How can you intentionally empower and develop the next generation of leaders for your organization? Because if you do that, you're going to sustain yourself. You're going to be able to adapt in situations where you have to go online, adapt in situations where the room wasn't set the way you wanted it to be, adapt in situations when a budget's not what you had hoped it would be, or a fundraiser doesn't work out as you had wanted it to. Enabling others to act is all about empowerment. And empowerment helps trust, helps communication, and will create strong bonds for you and your organization. Which leads us to the fifth practice, encourage the heart. And encourage the heart's two commitments are recognize contributions by showing appreciation for individual excellence, celebrate the values and victories by creating a spirit of community. So when I was active as an undergrad in my fraternity, we would have business meetings, and normally we just covered business. But part of that would be selecting a service project. Part of that would be working on a new member program. Part of that would be seeing what other collaborative things we were doing. Sometimes we had heated debates on things, but we ended meetings with this neat thing called Thank You Brothers, where we would acknowledge other brothers and what they did and how they helped us. And it might be helping someone study, helping someone have a quiet place where they could go read and do things to be prepared for that big test. Maybe it meant helping someone with their car, or maybe it meant just being there to talk to them because they were away from home and they got bad news from home and they needed that brotherhood. And then you thank them at the end of the meeting with Thank Your Brother Awards. And it was a nice way to wrap up meetings, especially when there might have been some intense debate about things. So recognize contributions and show appreciation for others. So that might be having that thank you member thing of where did members step up and help each other out? Where did they go above and beyond? Maybe it's even bigger than just the organization, but you know you have that member that was struggling with calculus and they did better on the test than they expected, and it really worked out well. And though your organization has nothing to do with calculus, sorry, Math Club, we're not talking about you with this one, you make a point to encourage them and celebrate them, because that's going to show them still that their organization can be that comfortable space, could be that extra home, so to speak, for involvement and activity and camaraderie in ways that you don't experience elsewhere, even if it is about that test or maybe that major project or maybe that person who's afraid to public speak and they had to give that 5-minute presentation for the first time and they got through it, and recognizing them that way and thinking about how in enabling others to act, could you have helped them with that? You could have had them help with a program or an activity or a presentation and meeting to help prepare them for that class. And that's where you really give back and help people grow outside of the classroom. Celebrate the victories. Create that community of spirit. So maybe it's a pat on the back where you draw a handprint out and write nice things about everyone at the end of the semester. That's something you could even do virtually through Zoom rooms that way and share through a board or something in that respect. But it's really celebrating that aspect of thank you for what you bring to the team. Congratulations on your success. We value you. So my challenge to you with encouraging the heart, because if you're watching this, it means you're involved in student organizations, means that you are thinking about being a leader and you're involved in leadership as a follower, a leader by helping programs and such. Think about someone who's encouraged your heart. Maybe it was that old coach. Maybe it was the band instructor. Maybe it was the person at Big Brothers, Big Sisters growing up. Maybe it's a current professor. Maybe it's your hall director. Maybe it's a family member. Think about that person and take some time in the next 2 days. So yes, I'm setting a deadline for you in the next 2 days from when you see this to call that person or FaceTime that person or Zoom that person and say thank you. Thank them for encouraging your heart. Thank them for the impact that they've had on you. And then think about that practice as you become a leader or even as a follower, how you can say to that leader, hey, you did a good job with that. I know that was really hard running that meeting because people were so split, or you know what, that thing didn't work and we had to take some grief, but you did it with poise and style and well done. Because sometimes we learn and get a lot out of what doesn't go perfectly too. So be mindful of encouraging the heart and encouraging others that way. So that gives you time to think about how will you now utilize the 5 practices to bring your organization's mission and purpose to life. So from modeling the way to inspiring a shared vision, challenging those internal processes so that you can overcome them when they hold you back and create good new ones, enabling others to act, empowering people through your entire system, new members to officers, and then saying thank you and celebrating those victories. Maybe it's the program, maybe it's the meeting, maybe it's, wow, we've got 10 new members this fall, and encouraging the heart and moving that forward. And this is something, again, if you're looking at this in an organization meeting, pause this, take some time to think about it, and have that discussion. It's something you can do throughout this. I'd like to thank those that were here live for attending. Again, my name is Mike Paestella, Assistant Director of Campus Life for Student Involvement. That is my email. And for those of you that took time to watch, think about how you can apply this. Think about how you could use this as a program for your organization. Think about reaching out to me, how I could meet with you and your officers or your members and talk about the SLPI, talk about the history of leadership, and other things happening with your student organizations. Because while we can't all get together in the point in MCC right now, we do have Zoom, We have programs like this, and we have other ways to support you. So please take some time to reach out and let me know how I can assist. And in closing, just a brief referencing. Kouzes Posner wrote the book, The Leadership Challenge. And from that book, The Leadership Challenge, the Student Leadership Practices Inventory was born. And again, those are 30 behavior questions that then can give you some insights into how you use the 5 practices. And then some of our historical information was adapted from Susan Comovey's work, Exploring Leadership for College Students Who Want to Make a Difference, which is a fantastic textbook with her and her team out of the University of Maryland and the National Collegiate Leadership Group. So a great group there. With that, I'm going to go back to the slide here that has my information, should you be interested in it. And at this point, I will stop our screen share and stop recording our video and start to bring the